Hi everyone! Welcome to this month's A Garden in Every Season tour. September is one of my favorite months and we have a lot of really fun plants that are in flower right now for late summer. This time of year is also a really great time to get outside in your home garden, and I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about that later on in this video, so I hope you'll stick around for that. But again, like I said, we've got some really great plants to show you and I'm very excited, so let's get started. Starting off just to the immediate right of our botanical garden entrance, we have Actea pachypoda. It's commonly referred to as doll's eyes, and just from looking at it, you can obviously see why it gets that name because of those bright white berries with those black tips which mimic doll's eyes. And this is just a closer view of that. This plant is in the ranunculus family, and it is typical to these rich cove forest types. It does like shade, and the berries persist as well as the leaves, which are quite broad, and they are also compound leaves. And the plant entirely itself is actually toxic to humans, but not to birds, which is what actually feeds on this particular plant. And the leaves, you can see some more up there as well, persist, but the flowers are quite diminutive, and they're a spike of soft white flowers, again, that aren't really quite noticeable when they flower in late spring to early summer, but that is what obviously then gives rise a few months later to those developed white berries. And I find this plant in general to be a little bit spooky. Again, the reference of the common name doll's eyes can be a little off-putting for some people, but it really is a beautiful plant, especially if you are someone that has a lot of shade in your home landscape. I would definitely consider adding this. And maybe, we're only in the month of September, but October is just right around the corner, so I kind of view it as a Halloween plant of sorts. The weather in Highlands thus far has been seasonably cool. We can definitely tell that fall is in the air, and we have had some significant rain given some of the tropical storms and depressions that have made their way through, but otherwise the temperatures have been really, really lovely. And just down here we have our next plant. This is common white snakeroot. It's in the Asteraceae family, and it is typical to the cove forest types, more shaded areas, but it can also do well in partial sun. And it's a herbaceous perennial that flowers in September, but will even persist into the month of October. It has these very small, I think they're quite sweet, white flowers that are attractive to pollinators, and some very interesting ethnobotanical history is that this plant was believed to have or to be a cure for a snake bite, which is where the common name snakeroot is derived from. But actually, this was a real issue for folks because cows would graze and eat the foliage, and then folks would then drink the milk from the cows that had grazed from this plant and would get very sick and even die. And so that is where the term milk sickness and where that illness was derived from is from this particular plant. Despite all of that, this is a really wonderful plant to have in your home landscape as well. And again, the flowers I think are quite beautiful, and it does tend to seed, and it has these small and quite shallow rhizomes. So if you're looking to control it, then you can always deadhead those flowers before they go to seed in order to control that. Since this is a garden in every season tour, I wanted to pause and take a peek at our cucumber root. You all can see that those small flowers that I talked about in April are now developed into berries, and hopefully next month, or maybe even later on in the month of September, the leaves and those world leaves will start to develop and get some fall color, and they will be a beautiful maroon reddish color, which I hope that you all will be able to see if you're here visiting. The next plant that I wanted to discuss, which I am very, very excited to talk to you all about, is Parnassia. Parnassia acerifolia, Appalachian grass of Parnassus. This is a bog species. It typically, again, persists in these seepages and wetter soil areas. And acerifolia, so that is in reference to the reniform, which is those kidney-shaped leaves that you can see. And then the tall flowers, those stalks, are really beautiful, and they have these very common five-petaled flowers. And when you look up close, you can see that there's a deep venation to each of the individual petals that is also a green color, which I think is just a very beautiful and unique thing about this particular plant species. Again, as I mentioned, their typical habitat is bogs, but unfortunately, due to development, the habitat of Parnassia, there's several different species within this particular genus that are, slowly becoming more and more threatened and are in decline, just again due to the habitat loss and development that is pervasive around these areas. So it's a very special plant to look for while you're here. And just over across the way, we've got some beautiful goldenrod with some pollinators, which I will discuss the goldenrod more in depth in just a little bit. But further down, I did want to talk about our next plant, which is Lobelia. So Lobelia syphilitica, otherwise known as the great blue lobelia, is a beautiful late summer perennial, and it is obviously distinguished by the beautiful purplish to blue flowers. And these flowers are actually bilabiate, so if you look closely, you can kind of tell that there's a small top lip and then a bottom lip, which has those three lobes. And an interesting feature about this flower as well is it has those two white stripes, which are kind of guiding nectaries for pollinators to visit the plant. And in general, this species really loves wet feet. It can thrive in partial sun to partial shade, and it really does well in, again, those moister areas, but can also tolerate some dry soils as well. And again, the pollinators love it, especially because it is a later season species. And we've got more of our Parnassia flowering along here in the bog area, which I think is very beautiful. And up next, we have another one of my favorite species and a typical harbinger of fall, and that is our goldenrod, so solidago. There are lots of different native species of goldenrod that we have here at the Highlands Botanical Garden, and all are really wonderful to have in your home landscape. As you can see, the pollinators love it, and it is in the aster family, and it supports just a huge variety of pollinators, not only bumblebees or honeybees, but different beetles and butterflies. And it's just so fun to be out in the garden and to watch all the different pollinators that are attracted to our goldenrods. And I think goldenrod can sometimes get a bad rap because it's often associated with ragweed, and it's often conflated, but those are two different species. So those of you that are sensitive or maybe have allergies in the fall, goldenrod is not to blame. It's a really wonderful species, again, to incorporate. And again, the pollinators love it, and that is due to the high nectar rich flowers that are blooming right now in September, but will obviously persist through the whole month and even into early October, which I think is wonderful. Another lobelia that's in flower right now that I wanted to highlight is Lobelia Cardinalis. This is our cardinal flower. It's bright red, and the cardinal is in reference to those, again, very stark, bright red flowers. Similarly to our blue lobelia, it likes riverbeds and stream banks and those wet soils, but it can thrive again in full sun, partial shade, really whatever you have going on in your home landscape. And it has these very small but I think noticeable white filament tubes, which are attractive. And it has, again, similarly with our blue lobelia, those bilabiate flowers with those three lobes. And it's a beautiful species to have. Usually in nature, you'll kind of find them growing in tandem with each other, which I think is quite interesting. And we've got our Joe Pye weed, which is still hanging on, and a beautiful, beautiful sight to see as we enter into the cooler months. And I hope you all will stick around while I discuss some of the benefits to having planting time in the month of September.
So we are currently in our homeowners demonstration garden, which is directly in front of the botanical garden entrance. And I'm here because I wanted to speak to you all about why this particular month and time of year is a really great time to get out into your garden and do some work. And I do just want to preface everything that I'm saying with the caveat that this all depends on where in the world you are, right? So for highlands currently, right, given our elevation, we are already experiencing some very cool temperatures, very fall-like here. But say if you are off the mountain or in another state, these suggestions may fluctuate, but as a general rule of thumb, it's a great idea to know your particular planting zone. And your hardiness zone can really help to determine what time of year you can implement certain things in your garden. So I encourage you all to look that up to then correspond to everything that I'm suggesting. But as I go on, the main reason why fall is a great time for planting is number one, as I mentioned, it's cooler temperatures, right? So normally when we think of planting, we think of springtime as we are all looking forward to those spring blooms and the summer flowers, and there's also a lot of plant sales that typically happen in spring. But fall is a great time to plant because you've got cooler temperatures, which automatically means you're not having to water as much. And another really important factor in fall planting is the root zone. So when you're planting those plants in springtime, everything is kind of focused and all the plant energy is being directed towards producing flowers and leaves and so on. But in the fall, right, things are becoming dormant and things are starting to shut down, but the roots are still active. So when you plant things in the fall, then you're still allowing those perennials or whatever you want to establish roots before they go dormant in the wintertime, and then they're fully ready to then produce that shoot growth and flower growth when springtime comes around. Another really important thing that I would recommend you all doing in fall is to get a soil test. So having a soil test is really informative to let you all know what types of soils you have and what types of nutrients you may need to amend your soils with in the fall, because another great thing to do this time of year is to apply different soil amendments, right? And that really depends again on what soils you have and the things that you want to plant in your garden, right? So for example, if we have a plant that needs more acidity or less acidity, you're going to have to apply lime accordingly. For us here in Highlands, because we're a cove forest type, we have very acidic soils, and for us that means that lime application is pretty essential in order to allow some of these plants to grow. So in determining what our current lime levels are in our soils, then we can then adjust accordingly and apply those amendments. And the best way for you at home to take a soil test is to have your particular garden area. This can be a lawn, this can be a garden bed, and you can use a garden trowel, which is what I have here. This is a soil knife, sometimes also called a hori-hori, and this is just fine, or a garden trowel, either one works. There's also professionally what are used as soil probes, which you can also maybe find, but this really works. And you really want to just take a little bit of soil and you want to kind of go around to have an even distribution of the soil within your selected garden area. So for example, I might take a bit of a sample from this area, I might take a bit of a sample from back there, and maybe over there for this little garden plot. And then when you take those soils, you can go to your local county extension office. So in the state of North Carolina, we are very lucky in that we can send off our soils from April to November, and it's completely free of charge, versus other states will charge a certain amount. It's a very nominal fee. But that is a great way for you to then receive back that information from that particular soil test, to then learn what types of amendments you need to make, and in that same time, then once you're amending those soils, then you can add in those native plants as well. Thank you all so much for watching this month's A Garden in Every Season tour. I hope you all enjoyed learning about some of the plants that we have here at the biological station, and I hope that you all feel inspired to get out in your home garden to plant some native plants. I invite you all to visit our website, highlandsbiological.org. Under the Botanical Garden page, we have a list of some native plants that are great to implement in your garden. So do check that out and comment down below to let us know what plants you'll be planting or what native flowers are currently in your garden.